But there were so many things about the donor space that I felt like it's not moving fast enough. I want to make change.
And most people are held by their mentalities that I worked for this big corporation.
So I think one of our biggest challenges is that silos in the sense that we don't know what different people are doing.
I always say starting a business in Africa is building a whole ecosystem.
The agency, the Kenya Space Agency, I think it was last month that we launched what you're calling the communities of practice.
Amplifying African tech stories, elevating technical brilliance. This is the Geo Habari podcast. You're listening to the Space Ecosystem Playbook. To support the show, please follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you enjoy the episode, leave us a rating or review. It helps bring visibility to the podcast. Today's panel is such a powerful glimpse into what the future looks like. These are women who are not only confident and passionate about Africa's potential, they are actively doing the work to make this potential real. They're laying the very building blocks and baseline infrastructure on which ecosystems can exist, thrive, and scale. Here's how I'd put it. They are building what others often overlook within this continent. First up is someone who has won many hearts, from lawyer, tech ecosystem builder, and now an agri-tech champion. She is the Chief Growth Officer at Kuza One, where she is championing and leading the digitization of the agriculture value chain through their tech platform, but also through their ground network of rural agripreneurs. She has worked across government, startups, funding ecosystems, and her superpower is bringing clarity, purpose, and practicality into these rooms. She is a proud failed entrepreneur and attributes a lot of her learnings and milestones from that very experience. Allow me to welcome Sheena Raikundalia on today's panel. Next up is a trailblazer who has worked across some of the world's biggest tech companies, from the likes of Safaricom, Google, and Microsoft. She made a bold shift. She is the founder and CEO of Qala, a leading digital innovation company transforming Africa. Qala is building Africa's AI future from the ground up, training talent, shaping policy, and making sure African languages and realities are not left behind in this new tech wave. Allow me to welcome Dr. Shikoh Gitau. Over to you, Charles.
Welcome to the fourth edition of the Space Ecosystem Playbook podcast. Today, I welcome two distinguished ladies who have immense, diverse, and expansive experience in the innovation sector. Dr. Shikoh Gitau, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Qala, and Sheena Raikundalia, who is the Chief Growth Officer at Kuza One. I hope Sheena, have pronounced the second one correctly. The objective of the discussion is to explore ideas on how to build a thriving indigenous space ecosystem for Kenya. And the discussion will focus on the experiences by the leading voices, the two distinguished ladies who have been in the technology and innovation sector for some time. They have experience in terms of building ecosystems. And from the space sector, we're trying to see how then can we learn or borrow ideas from that experience. So we look at their journey, their experiences as tech leaders, and of course their perspectives on how we can bridge the innovation gap, not necessarily from the space sector, but across the sectors, but we're trying to see how the different sectors can weave through so that we have functional ecosystem. So I know we've heard of the bios, but I wanted to know or to hear any aspects that we have potentially missed out from the bios, more especially also from your younger self, because most of the time we don't have the younger self, the 10 to 20-year-old Shikoh, the 10 to 20-year-old Sheena. Maybe in about 2 or so minutes, if you can tell us how your journey has been in terms of those early years. Maybe we can start with Dr. Shikoh.
Thank you so much for having me. Honestly, I'm doing this because of my son who loves the space and he wants to be a space engineer, if there's anything like that, because he wants to go to Mars anyway. My younger years, I was brought up in a normal family, in a lower income family, in Nakuru. I was reading from something that Ken Joroge put out a few days ago, and it hit me that that is actually true. You never know you're poor because you have a well-rounded life. And I was blessed to have both my parents who love each other and then in turn loves us. I was brought up in a Christian family, grounded in those values. And yes, the money was not there, but the love was everything that a child ever needed. And I always say that I was grounded in faith and the belief that things are going to turn out for our good. Jeremiah 29:11, which talks about God having a good plan for our life. That is very important to talk about, is that the grounding, my family background was great. There was no money, but there was a lot of love from that end. And as a young girl, my mom at least tells me that I was a maths geek. And that's why I ended up being where I am. Because I actually do until this day love maths. Like I was joking the other day, is that if this whole AI CEO thing does not work out, I'd go and become a maths teacher. Because I really enjoy the art of solving problems. And maths for me is the one place like I really thrive when I'm not trying to solve world problems. Solving a maths problem gives me fulfillment, So that was me, and I ended up doing computer science because of my love for maths. I had an amazing teacher in high school who called it out for me, and it's important for teachers especially to understand how powerful they are in the children that they are bringing up. Because my maths teacher in high school, Mrs. Lois Coyle, is one who told me, "You're really, really good at maths. Why don't you double click at that?" And because of that, I had confidence that I'm good at maths. Even when I went to university, I knew I was going to do maths. Then in university, I met my first PhD in computer science. Dr. Kate, she had just gotten her PhD from MIT. And she told me something that what you just need to do is get through your undergraduate. Somebody will pay for you for your master's and your PhD. And while I did get a scholarship through my undergraduate, I was clear that I'll go ahead and get my master's and PhD through a scholarship. And that's happened. It's, again, having these leaders and authorities in your life speaking into your life. Yes. Thank you. I hope that is my younger life part has been covered.
Thank you, Shikoh, for that. And I'll get back to the place where you mentioned about teachers and parents. But let's hear from Sheena. How was your younger years?
Yeah, no, really, I'm so inspiring to hear Shiko's. So mine was a very protected lifestyle. My father was my kind of hero. My father died 3 years ago, and I think even to this day, he's been a big influence in my life. But of course, I'm Kenyan, but my great grandparents moved from India about 100 years ago. So you know how the British, they brought us to build the railways, and then those of us who didn't drown, those of us who didn't get eaten by those lions, we stayed, we built the railways, and in every single town, set up kind of these kiosks as the railway was being built, those dukas, right? Like, in fact, duka comes from the Gujarati word dukan. That's how we set them up. And then some of those grew to become businesses, but that's my roots. That's kind of where we came from, a very risk-taking entrepreneurial family. So my dad was the entrepreneur at heart, and I think when he was around 18, his father passed away, and he then decided to give up his dream. He wanted to be a doctor, and he actually went into electronics engineering, and he was working during the day, studying at night, because he was like, I'm going to be my own boss, and I'm going to look after my family, which was his mom and 5 sisters and a brother. And in so doing, he made it. Not many 19-year-olds have successful businesses, but my dad did it. And he tells us stories about like walking for miles, not having an office, faking it till you make it, and all the rest of it. And what was super inspiring is actually, even though he wasn't a techie at all, he actually used to have, you remember like Luthuli Avenue? And yeah, he used to have a shop in Luthuli Avenue, his first electronics engineering shop. And I remember at the time he was like, no, this doesn't make sense. If people come in, they need to be able to know what stock they want. If this stock is not available, then what's a replacement? He used to do transistors and resistors. For those of you who remember them old days where you didn't buy things, you used to repair things. Remember, when your TV stopped working, you repaired it. When your radio stopped working, you repaired it. Not like our life these days where you just replace things. And so my early childhood is based a lot seeing my dad, going there and seeing how it was. And at that time, he's not a techie at all. And he's like, no, I need this. And he found a techie, he's a young Kenyan guy. And he said, this is what I want. And he actually created the system out of DOS. I don't know if you guys remember MS-DOS. I'm giving away my age. And they built,
I do.
And they built a system. And every single customer there would be like, you know what, that Duca, the one that does tick, 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 tick. Even now, like 10, 15 years later, when I'd gone back down, they're like, oh, that one, that man, the one you do tick, tick, tick and tell you what it is. So despite being a non-techie, just by being an entrepreneur and realizing the value of it, I think that's that. So his kind of risk-taking and entrepreneurship, I think, has always been important to me and played an influence. But on the other hand, I was also very stubborn. I was the oldest child of like 2 sisters. I lived in an extended family, in a joint family. And for me, it was kind of like, I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to be a judge because I was very confident in myself. Even at 3, my mom remembers me saying, order, order. So I think it was very clear to me what I was going to do. And and then I said eventually I wanted to kind of become the president of the country because I thought things were wrong and I was the best person to fix it. Sadly, so that was me as a young kid, brought up in a very kind of inspiring, very large family, and then sort of my journey similar to Shikoh. I think education was really, really important to us. So I did my law degree in the UK. Became a lawyer, practiced law for 10 years. So if you'd asked me, my 10-year-old self, are you going to be working in tech? I'd be like, no, I'm going to be a lawyer. It's funny where life brings you. And just to completely say, I'm still a non-techie. So I think I've followed my father's footsteps in that sense, which is being a non-techie, but still being able to appreciate and work with the value of tech. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Sheena and Shikoh. And one of the things that I picked up that allowed me to pick that item is both of you talked about your parents. When you're talking, much of the time you spent was not on yourself, but on the parents, on the, of course, now Shikoh mentioned about the teacher. And I was left wondering in terms of that dynamics. Are we still using that premise to help build, because essentially those were communities, and ecosystems are communities. How important is parents and teachers in your community? And maybe I begin with Shikoh in terms of what your journey has been, and again the prominence when you even talk about your son. How important is the community in terms of building, and are we doing the right things currently?
I mean, the way we grew up and the way these kids are now growing up is very, very different. But there's one fundamental truth that remains, that people learn from seeing and mirroring than being told. So as I mentioned, I have a 9-year-old, and I have learned that I can tell him things for a long time, but if what I am saying does not mirror what I am doing, he will not do. And there's some things I never say a word. I just, because I am doing it, and he's there observing me at work, observing me at home, I just see him just doing it. I'm thinking, oh my God, where did you pick that from? Then I realized that he's speaking from me. The same way with my workplace. There's this podcast I read, and this guy was a CEO of a big organization, and it's called the Shadow Principle. And he says the way his leadership team kept asking people in the leadership team, why does everybody here dress so formally in a suit and a tie? Even the young people, they never like relax. And everyone's like, have you looked at yourself? So he ran an experiment. For 2 weeks, he came wearing like jeans and t-shirt and sneakers. And guess what happened? The whole organization literally changed their dress code. And it's called the Shadow Principle. And Shadow Principle does not only operate at a CEO level or parental level, but even the normal level. I always tell people, I remember when I was growing up, I picked Wanjiko Mugane. Wanjiko Mugane, at that time, A, we share a name. B, she was one of the most prominent women in boards in Africa, literally. Because I learned about her when she had been appointed the board chair, I think, of Kenya breweries, East African breweries at that time. And my mom, I remember showing me, look at her. She looks like you. She has the same name as you. And I remember starting to follow Wanjiko and just learning about her, just really, really admiring her from afar, because her becoming a role model. Even now, but Wanjiko is not in our board at Qala, because I went and found her. Literally, I like when I grew up, I remember when I got my first board appointment, I found her on LinkedIn. I sent her and said, Wanjiko, you don't know me, but I know you. I have followed your career for the past, since I was a teenager. Thank you for modeling for me what it means to be a woman in leadership since I was a teenager. And then we started laughing, and she said, even your hairstyle looks like mine, because when I saw her and I was a very impressionable teenager, I realized that I really want to be like this woman. The good thing is Wanjiko is such a person of integrity. She works hard. She's everything that a young girl would admire. I mean, like for me, at least at that time. But even now, when you look at it, who are we modeling for? Who are we role modeling for? And I'm very conscious sometimes when I say things and I do things without putting the burden and pressure of it on myself, is how do I ensure that when somebody picks me as a role model, I'm shadowing or mirroring the right kind of ethos for them to admire. And I have met all sorts of people, not just in Kenya, but across Africa. Because I remember I worked for Google and I was hired at Google. I made headlines across the continent in French, in Portuguese, in everything. Because it was like a very unique thing to happen. And I meet these girls. I read about your story. You came to my school. I saw a podcast. I saw you on TV. And I really admire, I follow you, And I've learned that without carrying the burden of being perfect, I try and role model the kind of person that a young girl in their teens or in their early 20s would aspire to be. Yes. Thank you.
Interesting. Sheena, because you talked about your dad being in the engineering field and you found yourself in law. Was that inspired by someone and again, you also talked about wanting to change. Did you have a mentor? Do you see yourself as a mentor?
Yeah, such an interesting question. And I think for me, and just to sort of add on to what Shikoh was saying, because it really resonated, I'm a mother of two girls. So I have a 6-year-old, almost 7, and a 2-year-old. And I also don't have any brothers. I only have 2 sisters. I've always brought up in a very female-heavy environment. Even the joint family that I talked about, there was only one boy out of 6 kids. I've grown up with women and now with my 2 daughters. And I think one of the things that Shikoh said that's really, really resonated, which is it's not what you say, it's what you do. So like right now, for example, I work from home a lot and I'm on meetings and things like that. So my 2-year-old the other day was pretending to be on the computer and she goes, I'm busy, shh, meeting, shh, shh. So I'm just like, it's true. They see what you are. And I'm quite an extroverted personality, so I can go and talk and be anywhere, and I do a lot of that stuff. And my older daughter is a real introvert, so for her it's like really, really fascinating to be like, oh my God, mama, you're talking on top of stage and so many people are looking at you. And for her, it's really, really interesting to be able to sort of balance it. And now for my kids, for them, my daughters, it's very normal to be sort of independent, financially independent. They see, so sometimes it's so your actions more than your words. And as Shikoh will attest to, you suffer from that mom guilt where I'm like, oh my God, should I be traveling, should I be working, should I be doing these things, when actually I should be with my kids and I want to be with my kids. But the way to balance that out is saying, my daughters especially, is they're seeing a version that they can be. They're seeing that and again, not to be perfection. I'm the opposite of a perfectionist. I actually hate perfectionism. I'm probably like the kind of the laziest get things done kind of a person rather than a perfectionist. But that's exactly it. I don't hold myself to such a high standard, but just the values, right? Like in terms of, do we have integrity? Are we compassionate? Are we doing things that are, like helping the environment that we grow in, the community that we grow in? Because that's a win for everyone. And I'm a true believer in that. Like I've seen that, business can be a force for good. You can create those kind of communities, you can inspire people, because right now too many people, and you asked that question, right? Who are the role models? Who do people look up to? And if your role models, and if the people that we are constantly sort of looking up to are, don't have the right values, i.e. are, just out to make a quick buck, or superficial, or whatever it is, if we start valuing the wrong, role models, I think that can have a really detrimental effect on kids. And one of the things that I think, which again you hit on, and Shikoh also mentioned, it's definitely, the way we were raised as kids, is very, very different to how we're raising our kids. And this generation is also very different. And one of the things that I really like about it, it's a generation that just doesn't take it serious. Like they ask. So my daughters, even at 2 and 6, they'll be questioning everything. And one of them, she said to me, the oldest, she goes, Mama, just because you're older doesn't mean I have to respect you. And I thought that was great. At first I was like, oh my God, like, she goes, you have to earn my respect. Can you imagine saying that to your father or your mother, like, when we were growing up? So I think the role models are super important, but it's also the society that has changed. They're growing up with so much information around them. They've got information at their fingertips. So it's really, really important to be intentional around people who have similar values, who want to make that change. And for me, growing up, it was like a super, like, we were all girls, right? Like, I genuinely, like, never, I haven't had any brothers, I haven't had any sons. So it's a very different kind of upbringing. And I think a part of it has played a role in the sense that we were each other's kind of support system. So I feel like I'm so fortunate that I have, the most strongest support system that anybody could ask for. And I think that's what helps. It's role models definitely are important, but that support system, that when you're down, and you will be down, and it's okay to be down, to have that person. And for me, it's my sisters, my mom, my family. So I think that's super important, that combination. I'm not sure I answered your question, or I just went off on
Yes,
one.
you did. You did, Sheena, quite well. And I like the element you also mentioned about the value system, and I'll get back to the value system later. But there is an element that you mentioned earlier when you were explaining about your dad and how tinkering has happened, how your dad would then try to resolve problems by doing. And also when you were growing up, most of us, and it's a conversation that I recently had in terms of the impact of the abundance. If you want to something, then you can potentially go to Jumia or to Amazon for those who are out there and then buy. Is that affecting innovation? Are we in a space where, again, information is freely available, so there is not so much struggle? Is that affecting how we're doing business? And again, Shikoh, you have a team that you work with. How has the element of abundance of information, abundance of solutions impacted especially our economy as where we see we are majorly consumers?
So for me, I think the grace, I call it the grace, not the luck I have, and then it's called it grace and privilege, is I work with a very curious team. And the curiosity means that while there is abundance of information and knowledge, there's also curiosity to ask and question. So one of the key things is questioning everything, and they are very good at questioning everything, literally. So for me, that has happened a lot, and that questioning and building the ability to question in my team is one of the best things I've learned, is showing them I'm not perfect. Don't come to me with for an answer. Yeah. When asked the questions, answer the questions yourself. Give me an alternative. When you're coming to me, come with 2 or 3 alternatives. Let's brainstorm and find a question. And it's the same thing, like even bringing up a child. I have brought my child to ask me questions, but mommy, why? Like Sheena said, they say, because you're old, I don't have to respect you. Your answer has to be solid, because they can find this information anywhere. Your answer has to be different from, or defensible from anything that they will find out there, from the internet to TV to their friends. Everybody has an opinion. You have to ensure that yours is solid enough and it's grounded enough for them to actually follow it. Yeah.
It's interesting because I also have 2 daughters and a son. and we went to one of our schools where my daughters used to go to. Had a forum where they would have mentorship sessions for for the parents, and then they were telling us that we are moving to becoming consultants as opposed to managers. When you have your 13-year-old going to the teens, then it means that it depends. It's what Shikoh you said in terms of how good your information is, in terms of how credible it is and how rooted it is. And sometimes I think we're getting lost in terms of not being able to make effort to give the best version of ourselves. And I now want to segue to Sheena.
No, let me just add that.
Please.
And having the ability to say, no, I don't know. And that is something our parents never used to do. There's no parent, a boomer parent or older, could agree to, I don't know, let's find out together. Is the other powerful thing I have learned with just this generation, is being able to say, can we find out together? I don't know.
Even the teachers, I think our teachers never used to say they don't know. And sometimes I think that has also affected us, because we have been taught in terms of how they knew, and then trying to weave that into what we should know, losing out the opportunity of being able to discover. And I wanted to go to Sheena. Sheena, you said you started out as a solicitor. How did you find yourself in innovation, in agri-tech, and more importantly in Kenya?
So yeah, great question. So as I sort of mentioned, right, like I fourth generation, my family's been in Kenya for about 100 years. My mom's family was from Uganda. So my mom was born in Uganda, her family. But as you know, in Uganda, there was a time when us, as we call them, Mundis, were all kicked out of Uganda by Idi Amin. And at that time, no country in the world except for the UK took us in. So my mom's family was taken in by the UK, and hence the British connection. I mean, the irony of it all, I know. And of course, we're back in Uganda, so clearly we can't kick us out anywhere. But the point is, that's the kind of the connection. And as I said, my father had a really successful business here, but we went abroad to study. And mainly because my father's health was not great. I think he was worried that in Kenya, or in Africa, to be honest, there's no safety net. If your kind of business collapses, and my father's business in that way was very, was very run by him. And he's like, if something happened to him, then he had 3 young girls, to be honest, who were his responsibility. And he didn't feel that, if anything happened to him, what would happen to us? So for that reason, we sort of moved to the UK. And that's where I kind of continued my career in the UK, obviously coming back to Kenya, visiting home, etc. And my permanent move actually is a funny story. I came for a friend's wedding in Kenya, and I ended up meeting my high school boyfriend, who was my boyfriend when I was 16 and I hadn't seen in years. And we met, and it was funny, but we sort of reconnected, and I guess those first loves never go away. And in less than 3 weeks, he had proposed to me, and I flew back to England, and I told my parents this has happened. And shock and horror, because I think everybody had given up that I would ever get married. And and then the next thing I knew, I was married, and my husband has a family business here. And although we were discussing where to be, Kenya just felt like the right place, the right time. And we sort of moved back, and it's been like over 10 years now since I've moved back to Kenya. And when I moved back, of course, everyone was like, oh, you need to be a lawyer. And I did. And I went to all those interviews, and I just thought, but I don't want to do that. Like, the energy in Kenya is so different. And I saw so many opportunities, and I was super excited and naive, like the age hadn't caught up when you're in that idealistic, naive phase. And and then I started my own business. I became an entrepreneur. I did an insurtech. It was an idea that I had, and that failed. But actually that failed that failed business taught me more than my entire career as a lawyer and my MBA combined. And I think here we don't celebrate failure enough. We hide it. In fact, so many people say to me, Sheena, don't talk about it. Take it out of your CV. Take it out of this. But let me tell you, that failure is the business was about comparing insurance, and I wanted to do insurance online end to end because I'd done a lot of insurance law as well. And the funny thing is, it was called, the business idea, it was called Kamadizi, make insurance easy Kamadizi, basically was the tagline. And just a few months ago, somebody messaged me and said, Sheena, do you remember Kamadizi? I was your first intern, and now he's in the US working for Google or whatever. So that's probably made me so happy that, nobody else probably knows this business, but like at least the two of us, it's there. But more importantly, that failure kind of taught me so much, and I'm like, we need to embrace it. And so that's when I kind of moved into the ecosystem space, saying there's so many learnings that I have to share. And so so then I kind of joined so sorry, that's my 2-year-old. And so that so then I kind of moved into the impact investing space. We started doing some work around angel investing, setting up a fund, research consultancy. And then actually I decided to move into the donor space. So I joined the British government. I was the country director for the UK Kenya Tech Hub, and that was an amazing experience. And and I got to actually set the strategy and fund innovators, and Shikoh and I did some amazing work there. Like it was just 60% of the people that I funded were women, and just all local Kenyan. It was set in Kenya, so not Africa. And then after doing that for about 5 years, I think I was like itching to go back in sort of the it was great to be in the donor space, but there were so many things about the donor space that I felt like it's not moving fast enough. I want to make change. And agri has always been my passion area. Like I feel like Kenya, Africa, we can feed ourselves, we can feed the world, we can make money while doing it, we can create lots of jobs. My dream is to see like a processing plant or manufacturing decentralized at village level. So as much as we talk about, Kenya and Nairobi, remember Nairobi, as my friend always says, Michael Onyango always says this, Nairobi is not Kenya and Kenya is not Nairobi. So I also think there's huge potential, especially around agri and business in the rural areas. So that's where I am. I also do a bit of board stuff, again, around that innovation ecosystem. So the answer is, as Shikoh says, I still don't know, right? I don't know where and how, but somehow I'm muddling along and enjoying it, and I'm hoping making some change because I can see it and yeah, that's
interesting journey. And again, I think sometimes, I don't know, sometimes we worry so much about the journey. We want to plan 5-10 years from now. And sometimes we don't allow life to happen. And I think we also lose out on allowing life to define itself, because like saying you started being in law, and then you have evolved into who you have been today. And I also wanted to hear from Shikoh, especially I like the element that you bring out, Sheena, in terms about failure and being able to learn from that. And I even saw in your profile that you pick that as one of the main items, and most of the time you don't acknowledge that. And I was wondering, Shikoh, you have been an entrepreneur and founder of quite a number of organizations, Umeli, Taasisi, Kibarua now, Greetings Trust, now Qala. How has failure impacted what has been your experience in that journey? And how have you evolved from one to the other?
So when people talk about failure, when you say the word failure, people feel like it's this spectacular, dramatic, I have fallen on my floor on the first with my face down. It's embarrassing, all of these things. But we fail every day. You fail, you wake up every day and you're thinking, I'm going to wake up at 6 o'clock. No, 7:30, you're still in the bed, failed. Yeah. So if we normalize that we fail every day, and it's how we perceive failure, because not only you not bounce back from all failures. Let's not lie to ourselves. Yeah, you not bounce back from every failure. What you will do is you need to learn from those failure, and it's how you perceive it. Failure is not always catastrophic. Yeah, you need to be able to see it as an opportunity to learn and learn well. And that's, I think, the challenge that many of us have is that we don't learn. We don't learn from our failures. So which means that we constantly have to go through the same challenge, through the same failure to be able to learn. Because I always say failure comes to your life to help you recalibrate. I always say to pivot your path. Yeah. And everything I have gone through, from like big, small ones that, I did not wake up at 6 o'clock to, oh my God, Safaricom fired me for not doing anything wrong. Yeah. All of those things contribute to all of who I am today. If I had not gone through, I did not wake up at 6 o'clock and missed a meeting or missed something, and I didn't learn from that point of view, I'll put an alarm, like 3 alarms before 6 o'clock too. Oh my God, I can do everything correctly by the book and still be treated unjustly and fail. Yeah. And how do I learn? It's what is the intention of my heart? What is the content of my heart? And how do I react to this situation? And for me is, do I make this a deliberating thing that I will not be able to say, I can grow from this? And for me, always, every time I feel like I'm facing a situation where I don't know where to look ahead, is I look at it and say, what am I supposed to be learning from this? And sometimes, as somebody, a friend of mine told me, Shikoh, always saying that, what am I supposed to be learning? Some failures, some of those things that happen to you, there's absolutely no lesson that you're supposed to be learning from. Life is hard. But for me, my approach is, if I don't look at every failure as a place to learn, and I say life is hard, I'll always have a negative approach to it. And yes, life is hard. And life is hard because we have to do hard things. I always say do hard things, but I always look at failure as a point of growth, of pivoting, and you have to sit down with yourself in that situation before moving ahead. Because the problem is, after failure, most people are always trying to move to the next thing. It's sit with yourself a couple of days and ask yourself, what is it I'm really supposed to be getting from this situation? And go ahead and get it. And sometimes it's not obvious, but the fact that you're open enough to want to learn from that situation, the lesson will come and it will become more apparent.
Interesting, because again, I think when we lose out on the lessons, then it means that what we were supposed to learn from the failure from that experience, and I like the idea where you're saying that we look at failure from the negative perspective, but there are also lessons that you could pick up from that lesson, from the failure itself. And I wanted to get the insights from Sheena. Sheena, you mentioned having evolved from where you're working from as a country director for the UK, Kenya Tech Hub. And again, you also have been serving at Kenya National Innovation Agency. And I was wondering, and you said there's a bit that you felt was not being realized there. And I also wanted to get your perspective in terms of, given that you served in the UK at some point and also served in Kenya, and you've also worked in big corporations, how is the experience different from maybe the multinationals and also how we run our operations within the country?
So that is a great question. And in fact, I always say this, right? Like when I sometimes feel like I actually know nothing, right? Like I sometimes feel like I actually don't have any specific skills. But the one thing that I do know is, because I've worked in so many different big, small, international, startup, fund, government, charity, tech, what I've realized is that one thing that I do know is I am able to understand what they're thinking and how they relate to each other, because the way a corporate speaks is very different to the way a startup speaks. And in fact, one of the programs Shikoh and I did together was a matchmaking around corporate and startups, and it was so hilarious because what a corporate was saying about scale and timing and speed was completely opposite to what the startup was saying. And then when I speak to like my role in Kenya government about innovation and what that means versus the ag tech that I'm in, again, very, very different. So I think the one thing is actually each person, so lawyers, for example, we have our own language. I think it's what makes us feel like, oh, we're lawyers, we're so clever. Techies have their own kind of acronyms. Government, same thing. So what I've realized is, the biggest challenge that we have, right, is that silos. And actually, if we figured out how to not just, and building a community is great in terms of building your community of techies or women leaders, and that's really, really great. But because of all the work that I've done, because I'm in so many different ones and so many different spaces, some of the best things that I've been able to do is just connect to people that I just know, and then I don't even follow it up. And then years later, I find out magic has happened. So I think one of our biggest challenges is that silos in the sense that we don't know what different people are doing. Silos in the sense that even when they speak, so silos is one, and then communication. We literally are like speaking different languages. And when you're speaking different languages, it's very, very hard to kind of connect. And so I think my one key skill is, because I've been able to be in so many different organizations and learn how they think and how they work, I have this thing where I can just bring different people together, understand what they're saying and say, no, this is what they mean. And this is how you should frame it. And that's resulted in magic. Because unfortunately, the way our education systems are framed is in this kind of narrow world, right? Like as Shikoh said, she's so good at maths. And this is what taught her. I hated maths as a child. Like I loved history, right? But at the end of the day, look at us. We're both in the same field because life works in that way that math skills are super important. Like, don't get me wrong. But what I'm saying is, in life, we don't work in silos. We work together. But even from schooling, we're taught in classes. You've got science, you've got maths, you've got geography, you've got history, you've got, but the reality is life doesn't work like that. You need to be able to deal with all these kind of different people. And yeah, it's different. And my advice to somebody, to younger people or even older people, right? Like, I think this whole idea that, oh my God, everything is about the youth is also not true, right? You can recreate yourself at 40, at 50, and so many people have done, right? At 60. Like, I mean, but because in Kenya and in Africa, we're so young and there's so many young people around, which is another difference. Like, when I'm in Kenya, I'm always the oldest person in the room or somewhere around the oldest person in the room. When I'm in the UK, I'm quite young, or I'm considered quite young, which just shows you, like, what power there is in the youth. So speaking to Kenya and in Africa, like, don't set yourself up to saying I just know this. Get different experiences where you can, and not all of them are paid experiences, especially when you're starting out. Some can be voluntary work, some can be like advisory, helping your fellow startup, while you're working in a bank is fine, or while you're doing law. So get different kind of exposure, because I think that will help guide what you're doing. And number two, don't be also, I think sometimes, as much as I've talked a lot about entrepreneurship, I also think we should be realistic about entrepreneurship, right? Entrepreneurship is hard, and it doesn't mean, and everybody shouldn't be an entrepreneur. We shouldn't glamorize entrepreneurship and startups the way we've done. I think the reality is, if we had, and this is where I speak that, it's our generation, us, we should create those opportunities so that there's good jobs for young people out there. And good jobs doesn't mean 9 to 5 in a bank. I mean, decent jobs for young people, so that the ones who choose entrepreneurship are the ones who are really want to do entrepreneurship, not you're forced to do entrepreneurship because that's the only way to make your money for a hustle, right? I think the gig economy is here to stay, so it's a good way to kind of experience different things. I'm surprised the AI word hasn't come in, but with AI, we know the future of work is going to be different. Of course, Shikoh is the expert on this, but the reality is, I think that exposure to different people, different environments, different countries, even if you get the chance, is it's a privilege. And I feel, that's what I said, I feel like I'm very lucky and privileged to have got all those experiences, because it's really it's a skill I never thought that I needed, or that would be so useful.
I like the bit that you mentioned about silos, and the agency, the Kenya Space Agency, what a reason, I think it was last month that we launched what you're calling the communities of practice, because we noticed part of the challenge that we have is people are working in their silos. If you go to the agricultural sector, you have the government, the Ministry of Agriculture, Carol, the research organization. You have the farmers in their own space. You have cooperatives in their own space. And we also have the tech people who are also developing solutions, the ones who are like yourself in agri-tech. And there is never that forum. If you go to most of the forums or meetings, you find different segments of the market. But I also wanted to hear from Shikoh, having served also from, you supported the African Development Bank, worked in Google, worked with Microsoft, the Safaricom, which is essentially the biggest corporation. What has been your experience from that, working for the big enterprises? And now again, weaving into what Sheena was talking about, creating decent jobs, because now you seem to have evolved into that role where you're creating decent jobs in now like you have.
The one thing I've learned from working from big tech to big corporations to working with startups and starting a startup is that the one superpower you must have is being fungible. And I tell this especially to my friends who are leaving corporate with the ambition of starting a startup or setting up a company, is that you have to be ready to drop off or peel off from your corporate skin and start to hustle. And most people are held back by their mentalities that I worked for this big corporation. I always say I work for Google, I work for Microsoft, I work for Safaricom, AFDB. So you carrying all of this weight of corporate and taking it to a startup and thinking, because I worked for this organization, I know how to do this. What you forget is in that big corporation, you had HR, finance, legal, all these people that were there. And when you're setting a company, you're all of those things. So you have to be humble enough to learn. And that is what most people don't do. It's being humble enough to learn and to ask for help and ask questions. And again, acknowledge you don't know. Yeah. Sheena has been with me since Qala pretty much started. And she will tell you, I don't know. And sometimes the UK government will say, do you have this document? I'll be running to our lawyer and say, we need to develop this document because we are 4 months old as a company, and I'm really grateful that Sheena betted on us when we were quite early. So with that funding, we were able to put so much structures and policies in place that still serve us until today. And being able to know that you don't know and not trying to feign it. And sometimes, yes, people say you fake it until you make it. No, sometimes it's just acknowledging what you don't know and going to learn. Because when you're faking it, you're taking up the important time that you should be using to learn. So for me, that has been the most powerful experience. And I've worked with the very best in the world and some of the worst in the world. And I've seen that as a weakness of all human beings. So you've come up, like the other one I've seen is you've come up from the startup ecosystem and you're being hired in a big organization and said, I have the startup experience, forgetting that these people work in a certain process and bureaucracy that has served them for a few decades, and understanding that just the humility to understand that, yes, you have amazing skill set. Do not undersell yourself, but also you don't know everything. And being humble enough to say, can you teach me? Can I learn from this experience?
Interesting. It makes me, as we move on to the next question, the question is on the experiences that we've been having or the feedback in terms of the startups, where when you read the media, you see a lot of financing being attracted or being available for the startups. And then we also have been reading stories of startups that are closing shop. I don't want to name names. And of course, now the metrics that indicate that about 9 out of 10 startups fail. But there is also the feeling that people are also using our market in the wrong way. Is it that lesson, Shikoh, that you're saying where people who are funding these are coming with a different set of expectations from startups, or what is making things the way they are in our ecosystem? Maybe Shikoh, if you can go first.
There's one of those things, I think it's a video, a podcast I listened to, and it was an interview where I think it's Elon Musk who was talking to somebody and saying many of the investors are great. They are great MBA graduates from Harvard, from Columbia, from fancy Ivy League university, but they don't have the operator experience. So they don't know how to run an actual business. So what happens in that case, because they lack the ability to understand how to start a business and to run it, the way they are investing in their startups is the expectation is very, very different. Now, add into that the African flavor. Yeah. I always say starting a business in Africa is building a whole ecosystem. I give this example all the time. In San Francisco, I'll sit down in a coffee shop for 2 weeks, build up something, go and sell, get 10 customers to use my e-commerce platform. Why? Logistics and payment has been solved for. So what I'm trying to solve for is just the merchandise or the whatever I'm selling online. That is the only thing I'm solving for. And with that in mind, what happens is when that person is saying, oh, but I'm an e-commerce or fintech investor, I come with that mindset to Africa where for you to run an e-commerce platform in Kenya, let me just speak it for Kenya, not even to other countries, is you have to, first of all, yes, build the app. Then you have to figure out logistics. Then you have to figure out payments. And payments, yes, we have M-Pesa, but nobody's going to pay you M-Pesa without them touching whatever they're selling. So you have to figure out how you're going to be receiving money while your stock is out there. Yeah. Then you have to figure out warehousing. Then you have to figure out the agency. Like you have to figure all these things out. Well, the end of it is you're trying to sell something on an e-commerce platform. And that ecosystem is what most in building is what most investors do not understand that you have to do. So whatever money they are giving you has to be spread across this whole supply chain before it makes sense to actually run this business. And that is the one thing that needs to be very clear to many of the investors. So in AI, for example, everybody's excited about AI. Consumer AI is going to be the best thing that have ever happened. AI in government service delivery. Then you go to my father, who is a pastor, and say, Dad, I'm doing this AI thing. So explain to him what AI is. He said, that is the devil. So where do you start? So you realize I can do the best thing ever, but the people who are supposed to be using these platforms have to be explained for what this are. So that's why, guys, we are doing like AI training. Yeah, we are doing AI training primarily because we want to make sure that our ecosystem is trained. That our ecosystem is fully trained and created awareness around AI. And then we have to build the developer community that is going to be building the AI. And then we have to build the models, right? And attract investment for infrastructure. This is a value chain that somebody has to build. And if I can go to an investor and ask for money for an AI platform, they will not understand that I have to train the awareness from one end to the next. Yeah.
Interesting, and I want to hear the comment from Sheena, given that now, and you can share a bit more what you're doing at Kuza One, and what Shikoh was talking about the ecosystem, and I have seen in some of your comments, and you had mentioned that in terms of the ecosystem. Are we making the same mistake in agriculture, where we come up with a shiny app that potentially you go to the farmer and the farmer doesn't even understand? And again, I think there's also the element of trust, where they don't seem to trust whatever is coming until when they're able to see it being implemented, like Shikoh was indicating. How has been your experience, and what are you currently working on at Kuza One?
Yeah, great question. I'm just going to add one thing to what Shikoh said, because it's something that I've spoken about lots of times, right? In Africa, you don't build one business, you build four. That's a given, right? But also, it's not like, and sometimes we hear these big numbers, oh, these people got this much money and they've still failed, they must be like fraudulent or this and that. I'm not saying they're not, but some founders have put their heart and soul into this business. They've mortgaged their houses and things, and they're getting a lot of backlash, which I think is unfair. And if you compare that globally, it's not like these global successful companies also didn't take money and time, right? In fact, the whole point of startups is it's a high risk, high return. That means most startups do fail. If they didn't, then they probably weren't aiming high enough. So if you take some examples, Uber took 12 years to profitability, and they raised $25 billion. I think Lyft was founded in 2012, raised $5 billion. I think they're still not profitable, or they've just cracked profitability. Airbnb took 8 years. They raised $4.5 billion, right? Palantir, 19 years, raised over $2 billion. It's not just a Silicon Valley story. I think in India, Flipkart, it took 14 years and they raised $7 billion. Grab in Singapore, 12 years, 14 billion in funding, right? So let's also not just judge the Kenyan founders and African founders by that same story of, you've taken money and you failed. Yeah, startups do fail, but it's not just Kenyan and African founders that have taken money and failed. First of all, in Africa, we actually need more money because of, as Shikoh said, the ecosystem is not built. But even in those countries where ecosystem is there, these startups have taken years and lots of money. And unfortunately, in Africa, we don't have that much money, right? All our money comes from the internationals, etc. So we also need that conversation around how do we get local people investing in businesses and not necessarily copying the Silicon Valley model. And that comes back to your really example about agriculture and agri-tech. A lot of the times, right, I meet techies, and they're like, we want to, disrupt the agriculture sector. And my one thing to them is, guys, you can't disrupt what hasn't been built. You can't disrupt a sector that hasn't been built. How are you disrupting the agriculture sector? We, like 40%. So if you look at even processors, like the businesses, the ones with the money, so-called the manufacturers, the SMEs, the bigger ones in Kenya, and I'll give you the Kenya example, they're operating at 40% capacity. Imagine your business operating at 40% capacity. Doesn't make sense. And one of the biggest things they say is, we don't get the right quality produce from the farmers. So they're operating at 40% capacity, while some farmers are losing up, some value chains are losing up to 70%. So imagine tomatoes are lying rotting on the floor, and there's a tomato processor operating at 40% capacity. what, like we need to build that ecosystem. And a lot of that sometimes is the boring bits, right? That nobody wants to do. But that doesn't mean there's no space for tech. There's a huge role for tech. If you see tech as an enabler, a magic e-commerce website, as Shikoh rightly put it, connecting farmers to buyers, is not going to solve all the logistical issues in between. So at Kuza, that's what we're doing. And that's what excites me about Kuza, is because we're saying we're not trying to build another tech, but we're actually kind of building that trust infrastructure. What we've done is we've said, we've seen these problems, right? We understand, we've been in the ecosystem. So let's flip the narrative. What if we train young people? We have so many young people who are looking for opportunities, and agriculture is an unproductive sector. From a business perspective, anything that's unproductive means likelihood of do it right. That's where you're going to make your money. You should actually aim for something that's unproductive, because you can make it slightly productive, and that's your business. So we said, let's train young people. And that's what we've done. So I'll give you the Kenya example. We've got young people, about 3,000 young people trained in almost 40 counties in Kenya, right? And what we do is we train them through this like a mini MBA. It starts with your mindset shift, etc. It's like a hybrid, a rural incubator. Imagine all these accelerators and hubs in Nairobi. As I said, Nairobi is not Kenya. So we've used technology to get this information through like offline means to the rural areas. We train the young people. But it's not just about training. You have to earn and learn. For us, it's always sustainability. You can't, you need to feed yourself. You've got expenses. So as we train them, we connect them to farmers, and they train their farmers, because even farmers need information. So now you must be thinking, how can a young person who knows nothing about agriculture, a little bit about agriculture, how can they be training farmers? Again, technology. We've managed to digitize 42 value chains, right? Crops and livestock in 10 languages, actually it's more now, in 10 languages, in 3-minute like bite-sized TikTok videos. So you can learn that. And then we've created like these offline toolkits where a young person can go. If the farmers want to talk about tomato, it's harvesting season, put up the 3-minute video, talk about it, you learn. And so what happens now is you're building that awareness for the farmers, but you're creating your market demand. So now a farmer might say, oh, but I need certified seeds, or oh, I need soil testing, because now I need to know what the pH of my soil is. And that's when they connect to our marketplace, right? Remember, I started with the marketplace last, even though everyone was like, oh my God, a marketplace. And you connect with that marketplace, and now you can pick who are your seed, who are all the soil testing companies, how much, who is the closest. And then the agripreneurs, as the in-person, arranges it and earn a commission. And what we're seeing now over the last 4 or 5 years is these agripreneurs are specializing and actually creating businesses. So one of them, Robert, was doing all this training on soil testing. And then he realized, actually, I can create like, organic fertilizer or with manure. And he did it. He hires 12 people. And now his friend agripreneur who owns an agro-dealer shop sells that, gives him a commission. She earns a commission. And they've done it. And this is what I'm saying. The magic is when you solve those problems. And for Kuza, we're saying we can't solve everything. And we've got so much data that AI powering is coming in through WhatsApp channels. And Shikoh, I need to share that with you. We've really been building in stealth. So eventually we'll be announcing. But what's happening right now is we've created this layer where you can access the farmers through agripreneurs. But we're saying we can't do everything. We know we can't. We're not experts at everything. So we're saying bring in the people who are. So we've brought in some finance companies, we've brought in some off-takers, we've brought in some input providers, and saying, here, now you guys can interact with each other through the agripreneur. And the big change we're trying to do, which is super hard, is start with the market. So I want to ask the processors, what do you need? Tomatoes, potatoes, poultry. Okay. What quality, what quantity? And then using our agripreneurs, they'll train the farmers to produce what the market needs. Then 70% of that loss hopefully will not be wasted. The processors, even if their capacity goes up by 5%, that's huge. That means more profits, more money, more investment, more people hired. And then we can start thinking about the exciting things like value addition, etc. Right? Because again, we need to get that mindset of agriculture is not just farming. And I give this example all the time, right? Sukuma for us is like everyday poor man's food. But kale, same family, is a superfood. And again, I give this example. When I was pregnant, my doctor said my firstborn, secondborn, I did nothing. There's a big difference between first and secondborn. But my firstborn, my doctor said to me, oh, you need to eat protein, you need to do this, So then they said amaranth. And I went home, I was like, oh my God, I need to buy amaranth. And I went and bought these amaranth crackers. I came home and my nanny, she's like, this is terere, which we think of it as like poor man's food. So then there's all these opportunities in marketing, branding, where the world is moving to gluten-free, right? Most of our traditional crops, that's what we are. We could be the brand champions of gluten-free cassava, ugali, for example, for the world. So this is where it comes in, but we have to sort out that basic first. Connect, making sure that you've sorted out that production layer, 70% is not going to waste. Agri-processors are not just sitting over there like that. Then all this other exciting stuff can come. And tech and data helps to solve that. But if we keep seeing agri-tech as this big miracle, my website is going to solve, this, then unfortunately, you're in for a big disappointment.
Quick question, Sheena, and I like even what you're explaining is essentially the ecosystem, how you need to have all the players playing, like when you have a music concert where you have everyone playing their role and doing it in the right way. What do you see as the role of government in this conversation? Because sometimes you find the government is there, sometimes you don't find it. And where the government is not there, should the private sector take that space? To you again.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a big believer that, the role of the government should be in creating an enabling environment, right? And ideally, that's what the government should do. Build the markets for the private sector to take over. Government should not be in business. That's not what government's good at. Government should not even be picking people to fund and stuff. That is, again, not what government is good at. I know this as somebody who has been in government and does a lot of government advisory work. However, there is also this problem in the private sector. And in fact, I was just last week speaking at the India Africa Business Conference, and we heard from the founder of the BPO industry called Raman Roy in India, where there was no BPO industry. And literally the way he describes how the BPO industry came was like a complete accident. He was working for, American Express. And as a result of that, he kept getting invited for meetings. And every time he was in these meetings with all these big countries, he's like, we can do this, we can do this. Eventually, they were so mad at him. They're like, you know what? Here, Korea has not managed to do their reconciliations for years. Go and do them. And the reality is, he was saying, they just wanted to shut me up. And he goes, guess what? I went, we got it, we figured it out because I knew what I had. I didn't know the answer, but I knew I had a trainable, young, smart population who would be able to do it. And they did it in 6 months. And that's how the BPO industry was born. And he's like, and I know in the story you hear that, government, he goes, rubbish. He's like, government did not help us in anything. He's like, I remember when we were trying to pitch for it, and I tried to get some American Access people to meet ministers. They didn't show up. In Australia, in Sydney, 3-4 ministers were showing up. So I think there's also this ideal, right? That, oh my God, government should do this. And yes, potentially. But the reality is, all it takes is a group of like-minded people to get things done. And then the government comes. Whether he gave India as an example. And he said, the one thing he said to Africa and Kenya, he goes, if you're going to sit around and wait for government to create the enabling environment for you, it's never going to happen. He goes, ideally, that would be great. He's like, but as entrepreneurs, work with groups of other entrepreneurs in a win-win and figure it out, and government will follow, right? And he's like, and Kenya sometimes, as people say, right, we work in spite of government. So there is a huge role for government to play, create enabling environments, open up markets, do all of these things. Are there some people in government doing it? Yes. Are there some people in government not doing it? Yes. But if we just sit here, and this is one of the things I have to say to us as Kenyans, as people, if we just sit here and say, oh, because of government didn't do this and this and this and this, well, we'll always sit like this. And the reality, who is government? We are government, right? We are the ones who should be voting or vote. We're the ones who should be running for government. We should apply for these board positions and do these things. Government is not some separate entity that we can say, oh, government. We are government, right? So that government is a reflection of us. If we don't want to make that change and get out there and vote, we don't want to run, we don't want to take on board roles and things like that. And and I don't blame people. It's hard. Like, it takes so much time. My board roles, my government advisory takes a lot of time. I don't get paid for it. It takes a lot of time. But to just sit here and expect government to do everything, and then if everything fails, blame it on government, is also not the way. You want an industry. We have a brilliant example, right? The BPO industry, and Raman Roy had come to Kenya and he spoke. Honestly, that story just blew me. And I think Shikoh's colleagues were there as well. And even they were like, oh my God, like this is amazing, because that's what we can do. We can create a BPO industry or a manufacturing of, gluten-free industry. We can do it. There's nothing, a group of people, if you get together with a mission and do it, there's nothing that can stop us. And yeah, hopefully government can create that enabling environment and help us. But to sit around waiting for them, we'll do nothing.
I want to bring in Shikoh because I think recently, I think there's a comment that you had put in one of the socials indicating that policy should not go behind of innovation. And maybe if you comment to what Sheena was talking about, and also if you can also talk a bit more about what you're doing at Qala, given that you're in AI, how does that landscape look like? Because sometimes we find that sometimes we follow tech too much and we forget about the problem.
AI is a huge opportunity for the continent, and this is not just, this is beyond hype. But what the continent needs to do is organize itself. It needs to organize itself around what are the key priority areas for the continent. It needs to have a strong agenda, because everybody, I mean, we saw in the last 2 weeks, we've seen the US launching their AI action plan. We have seen the one from China. The EU launched their guiding principles. What is Africa doing in all of these things? So we have, as a continent, need to do that. And that's the work of government. But we cannot just wait for government to do something. We have seen what the private sector in the US is doing, right? The private sector is literally defining the future of it. OpenAI just announced a partnership with the Netherlands government for a data center. And that is coming to us fast and furious. Perplexity announced a partnership with Airtel 2 days ago. So a lot is happening. But are we just going to be participating? Are we going to be hearing these announcements? Perplexity is doing this. What is an African organization doing this work? Who is doing this work? So we have to be very categorical about what we are doing. And that's what Qala is doing, is engaging at both a governance level, but also building stuff to ensure that Africa is not just a participant and a consumer, but you're also very deliberately building for Africa and by Africa.
Thanks, Shikoh, for that. And I want us now to wrap it up. And I wanted to hear starting from Sheena and then Shikoh, in terms of what would be the one or two critical things, based on your experiences in tech and innovation, that Kenya and, of course, Africa by extension can do to bridge the innovation gap. And, of course, now as we seek to build a vibrant innovation ecosystem, what should be our top priority as a region?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. So I think first is I'll give one soft skill type answer and one technical type answer. The soft one is I think we need to sort of trust each other more and break those silos. I think trust is what made kind of businesses, and I go back to that example of my great grandfathers when they moved here, and great grandmothers when they moved, great I think when they moved here. You know, they moved to a different country. They didn't know anyone. But they had a community. They built a community where, you know, you needed financing, you turned to each other. You needed this, your schools, whatever. You know, it was a hard time where nobody wanted us, right? Like local Kenyans were like, who are these people? British didn't want us. It was just, you know, so it was hard. And they built a community and they thrived. So I think there's a lot of lessons there, you know. And now our communities don't have to be based on tribe and race and religion and all of these things. I'm not saying are not important, but now let's build a community of values where it doesn't matter, you know, a community of values and trust. So you could be in the corporate world, you could be in the startup world, as long as we have this mission where we really want, it's Africa's time. We want Africa to thrive. It is an amazing place where, you know, as a returning diaspora, now that I call myself, I wouldn't want to be, you couldn't pay me to move. You couldn't pay me to leave this country and this continent to raise my girls elsewhere. So we have a lot of optimism. We have a lot going for us, right? So let's get that positive mindset and build a community, as you've said, right? Of different, you know, we can have our individuals, but let's learn how to collaborate with each other and trust each other. And that's how we'll be able to do business with each other. That's how we'll be able to grow the ecosystem. That's how we'll be able to. And then I'm not saying not to compete. I'm very realistic. Of course, we're competing. We might be competing for funding, for customers, for screen time, whatever. Keep competing in those areas. Competition is good, but collaborate where we can collaborate, where it's a win-win for everyone. So let's identify, these are the places we collaborate. These are the competing places. Let's not get involved. So number one. And the second thing I think is also is a little bit more of a technical one, is data. You know, we have so much data, we have so much information, we have so much knowledge, right? Like whether that's our traditional agricultural practices, whether it's our traditional medicinal practices, whether it's the traditional way in which we had governance, how we ruled, how we did business. There's so much information that we have that's probably sitting on our great grandparents, you know, minds, on our fathers, whatever. Let's make sure our languages, our stories, let's not lose that, especially in this world of AI. If there's no data, we'll become invisible, or we'll be fitting somebody else's context. And this is where I love the work Shikoh and team are doing. But I think, you know, data, knowledge, information, let's be proud of that. Let's find a way to capture that so that whatever we build is built on that. I think tying the traditional with the future. So those are my two things to do.
Thank you, share over to you, Shikoh, for your key highlights.
So for me, my closing one is two things, and I'm just building up on what Sheena has said. Is number one, we need to deliberately invest in our talent. When you look at China and the US, China is beating the US hands down, literally hands down in the AI world, mostly because China has great talent. I was looking at the ACL submission, Advanced Computational Language Conference that happened last week. And they were showing that in ACL submissions, China has submitted 52% of all the papers. Why? Because they have invested in their talent. Yeah. So we need to invest not only for Africa will be the world's workforce by 2050, that is 25 years from now, not just for the world, but also for Africa ourselves. So we need to be able to do that. Number two, we need to believe we can. So Africa can. We need to believe that Africa can do stuff. We can build stuff. I was saying there is some work we published, and people are questioning about our methodology. How did we do it? Because they didn't believe that an African company can actually do this. So what we've committed as a company is we will be publishing, every month we'll be publishing something new until people believe we can do more than talk. We can do great scientific work as Africa. Yeah, we can publish great scientific work as Africa. And that is what I'd love for Africa to do. Like in the space sector, let's start writing. Because the problem with Africa is that we know we can, but we don't write it out. We don't publish it. We don't communicate it. We need to start communicating. And as Sheena said, in the next 5 years, you're going to be wiped out if we do not. Yeah, we need to call out that the current AI regime is biased. It is wiping out our whole languages, right? Mm-hmm. So we need to be able to do that. We're not just saying it, we are documenting it scientifically, so you cannot argue with it. Yeah.
Great. Thank you again for creating time to share your insights on a Saturday. My key takeaway, trust and breaking silos, investing in data knowledge and information from Sheena, and being deliberate on building our talent, and of course, believing that Africa can. So again, thank you for having created time. Thank you for sharing your insights. And we hope this will go a long way. So we bring it to an end and looking forward to the next episode. Thank you again, and looking forward to future conversation on this and other topics as we evolve. Asanteni sana.
Asante sana. Thank you.
Thank you again, Shikoh. I know you were being pestered, and even Sheena. Thank you for having created time for this conversation. It's very insightful from me, and I believe the community as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Take care. Enjoy the rest of the day.